I lost my daughter 7 years ago. Not to death, I want to be clear about that, because for a long time I almost wished it had been death, since death at least has the decency to be final. What I lost her to was a diagnosis. Early onset Alzheimer's, the neurologist called it, and I watched my little girl, my Rosalind, my Roz, disappear, one memory at a time while her body kept walking around the house like nothing was wrong. But 3 days ago, my grandson and I took her to a new specialist. And when my grandson stepped out into the hallway to take a phone call, the doctor set down his pen, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, so quietly I had to lean forward to hear him. "I need you to keep your daughter away from her son." I didn't even have time to ask him what in God's name he meant. The door opened. My grandson walked back in, holding a small paper bag from the pharmacy down the street, and my heart nearly stopped beating in my chest. "My name is Arthur Whitfield. I am 68 years old, and for 31 years I was a claims investigator for one of the largest insurance companies on the East Coast. That's a polite way of saying I spent 3 decades of my life learning how people lie. I learned to read the pause before a sentence, the story that comes out a little too smooth, the receipt that's dated one day too late. I built a career noticing the things other people missed, and I was good at it. Good enough that they gave me a plaque when I retired. Good enough that younger investigators used to come to my desk and ask me how I knew, how I always knew. I never had a good answer for them. I just paid attention. And I want you to remember that about me as I tell you this story, because it matters. Everything that happened to my family happened because, for the first time in my whole life, I stopped paying attention to the people closest to me. I was so busy watching the world for lies that I never thought to look for one sitting at my own dinner table. Before I go any further, I want to know where you're listening from tonight, son or daughter, wherever you are. It means something to an old man to picture the kitchens and the porches and the late-night car rides where these words might be landing. Tell me your city in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are, and if you have ever had to fight for someone you love against the very people who were supposed to love them too. Do an old man a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I have more of these nights in me than I have years left to tell them, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you can't understand the ending without it. My wife, Eleanor, passed 11 years ago. Cancer, quick and cruel the way it sometimes is, gone in 4 months, from diagnosis to the funeral. After she died, it was just me and Rosalind's son, my grandson Caleb. Roz had never married Caleb's father. He'd left before Caleb was even born. Some story about a job out west that never materialized into so much as a Christmas card. And so it had always just been the 3 of us, really. Once Eleanor got sick, Roz moved back into the house with Caleb when he was 11 years old, ostensibly to help me take care of Eleanor in her final months, though I think, if I am honest, we were helping each other more than either of us wanted to admit. Roz had been a paralegal at a firm downtown, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who could read 100 pages of contract language and tell you exactly where the trap was hidden. She used to help me with my own case files sometimes, back before she got sick herself, and I still remember the way her eyes would move across a page, fast, hungry, like the words owed her something. The diagnosis came 7 years ago. She was 41 years old. Early onset Alzheimer's is a cruelty specifically designed, I think, to punish families who believed they had more time. One year, she was managing million-dollar settlement negotiations. The next year, she was calling me at 2 in the morning because she couldn't remember which door in the house was the bathroom. I watched the disease take her in stages, the way water takes a shoreline slow, and then all at once. By the time she was 44, 3 years ago, she had stopped speaking in full sentences most days. She needed help bathing. She needed help remembering her own son's name some mornings, though she almost always, God help her, remembered mine. Caleb was 22 when it got that bad. Freshly graduated from a business program at the state university, and instead of taking the analyst job he'd been offered in the city, he came home. He said he couldn't leave his mother, not like this, not with an old man for the only other family in the house. I want to tell you, plainly and honestly, that this touched me more than almost anything in my life. I had half expected him to run the other direction, the way young men sometimes do when illness moves into a house and doesn't plan on leaving. Instead, he stayed. He took over the finances, Roz's accounts, my accounts. Everything got folded into what he called household management, a phrase I didn't think twice about at the time because he explained it so reasonably. He said it would be easier on me, easier on all of us, if one person had a clear view of the whole financial picture instead of 3 sets of overlapping bills and statements. I signed papers giving him power of attorney over his mother's affairs. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment, because it is going to matter very much later in this story. Power of attorney. I signed it gladly. I signed it grateful, even, because I was 65 years old and exhausted and my daughter's mind was leaving her one room at a time, and here was this young man, my own grandson, offering to carry a weight I did not think I had the strength left to carry alone. For a while, it was almost peaceful. Caleb was attentive. He managed Roz's medications, drove her to her appointments, sat with her in the evenings while I did the dishes, told her stories about his day even when her eyes had that faraway look that told me she wasn't following along. He was, by every measure I had, a good son. I used to sit on the back porch some nights and think about how lucky I was, in the middle of all this grief, to have to have helped raise, alongside Eleanor, a young man with that kind of character. It was Roz's old primary care doctor, Dr. Halverson, who first mentioned that her decline seemed unusually fast for her particular subtype of the disease. He said it gently, almost as an aside, during a routine appointment about 18 months ago. These things don't always follow the textbook, he told me in the hallway afterward, but I'll admit, Mr. Whitfield, I would have expected a slower curve at her age, and with her genetic markers. I didn't think much of it then. Grief makes you want simple explanations, and the disease is just cruel, was simpler than anything else I might have considered. Dr. Halverson retired not long after that conversation, moved down to Florida to be near his own grandchildren, and Caleb was the one who found us a new specialist, a neurologist, 2 towns over with an excellent reputation, Dr. Priya Menon. Caleb said he'd done the research himself, read through reviews, called around. He said he wanted the best for his mother, and I believed him, because why on God's green earth would I not have? 3 days ago, Caleb drove Roz and me to Dr. Menon's office for what was supposed to be a routine 6-month evaluation. I remember it was raining, one of those thin, cold October rains that gets into your bones no matter how good your coat is. Roz was quiet in the back seat, humming something I didn't recognize, her hands folded in her lap the way they always were now, like a woman waiting for a bus that would never come. Caleb chatted the whole drive about a project at the small logistics company where he worked in the office, something about a client account he was managing. I remember thinking, not for the first time, how proud Eleanor would have been of him. Dr. Menon's office was on the 4th floor of a medical building that smelled like every medical building smells, antiseptic and old carpet. She examined Roz for the better part of 40 minutes, cognitive tests, motor function, questions Roz answered, with that gentle, drifting confusion that had become her permanent weather. Caleb sat beside his mother the whole time, holding her hand, and I watched him do it and felt something in my chest ease, the way it always did when I saw tenderness pass between them. Near the end of the appointment, Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, apologized, said it was a client, said he had to take it, and stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door mostly shut behind him. The moment the latch clicked, Dr. Menon's whole posture changed. She had been warm and unhurried for the entire appointment, the kind of doctor who makes you feel like you're the only patient on her schedule. Now she leaned forward across her desk, and her face had gone the color of old paper. She set down the pen she'd been writing with. Her eyes flicked once toward the door, toward the muffled sound of Caleb's voice in the hallway, and then back to me. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, and her voice had dropped so low I had to lean in to catch it. "I need to say this quickly. I need you to keep your daughter away from her son." I felt the floor of the world shift under me. "I'm sorry," I said. "What did you say?" "There are markers in her latest blood work," she said, faster now, glancing again at the door, "that are not consistent with Alzheimer's progression. I flagged them 8 months ago to the physician who was seeing her before me, a referral note in her file, but the note was never followed up on, and I only just—" She stopped herself. She looked, for one unguarded second, genuinely frightened, and I have spent 31 years learning what fear looks like on a person's face, so I promise you, I know what I saw. I can't say more right now. I need you to trust me. Get new blood work done somewhere your grandson doesn't control, somewhere he doesn't know about. Please." That was as far as she got. The door opened. Caleb walked back in, and in his hand was a small white paper bag from the pharmacy on the corner, the kind with the receipt stapled to the top, and he was smiling that easy. Familiar smile he'd had since he was a boy, and he said, "Sorry about that, Mom. I stopped and picked up your evening dose on the way. Figured we'd save a trip," and my heart nearly stopped beating in my chest, because I did not know, in that moment, whether I had just watched my grandson walk back into a room holding kindness or holding a weapon, and the not knowing was the worst feeling I have ever had in 68 years on this earth. I did not sleep that night. I want to tell you honestly, brother, sister, whoever is listening, I lay in my bed and I ran 31 years of training over every memory I had of the last 3 years, and the training kept snagging on things I had let myself explain away. The pace of Roz's decline, faster than the doctor expected. The way Caleb had insisted on managing her medications himself, refilling and dispensing them personally, instead of letting the pharmacy's automated system handle it, which he'd framed, when I'd once asked, as wanting to make sure his mother never felt like just a number. The power of attorney, signed 2 years ago, which meant that if anything happened to Roz, if her condition worsened to the point of full incapacitation, if she needed to be moved into long-term memory care, if her modest inheritance from Eleanor's side of the family and the equity in the house that was technically still half in her name someday needed to be liquidated, Caleb was the one with the legal authority to make every single decision, and I was not. I thought about the way Caleb had found Dr. Menon himself, had researched her, had driven us there, and then I thought about the doctor's face, the genuine fear in it, the way she'd said, "Somewhere your grandson doesn't control." By 4 in the morning I had made a decision, and it felt like the hardest decision of my professional and personal life combined, because it meant treating my own grandson, the boy I had watched take his first steps in my backyard, the boy who had chosen to come home instead of taking that analyst job in the city, as a subject. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because I am not entirely proud of it, even though I believe with my whole heart it was necessary. 31 years of insurance investigation teaches you things that don't show up on a resume. It teaches you how to document without being seen documenting. It teaches you that the truth, if it exists, will always show itself eventually to a person patient enough to watch for it, and that the hardest part of any investigation is never gathering the evidence. It's forcing yourself to keep watching, even when part of you is praying, "You're wrong." The next morning, I told Caleb I had a doctor's appointment of my own, a lie that came out of me smoother than I would have liked. 31 years of practice showing itself in a way that made my stomach turn. I drove myself to a private lab across the county line, one with no connection whatsoever to any pharmacy, any clinic, any name that Caleb might recognize, and I paid out of pocket, in cash, for a home phlebotomy service to come by 2 days later while Caleb was at work, to draw Roz's blood under the pretense of a wellness check. I told her in one of her clearer moments, holding her hand, watching her nod along even though I wasn't sure how much she understood was just Grandpa being extra careful. Then I went to a hardware store 40 minutes from home, someplace I'd never shopped at in my life, and I bought 4 battery-powered security cameras designed to look like ordinary household smoke detectors. I paid cash there too. That night, after Caleb had gone up to his room and I heard his door close, I did something I had not done since I was a much younger man, rewiring lamps in Eleanor's in my first apartment. I got down on my aching 68-year-old knees in my own kitchen, in my own hallway, in the corner of the sitting room where Roz spent most of her afternoons, and I installed those cameras myself, one by one, working by the thin light of a headlamp, moving as quietly as a man built out of creaking joints and old fear possibly could. I put one above the cabinet where Roz's medications were kept. I put one in the hallway outside her bedroom. I put one in the sitting room. And I put the last one, God forgive me, in the kitchen, angled toward the counter where Caleb prepared his mother's evening pills every night at 7 o'clock, the way he had for 2 years, the ritual I had watched 100 times and never once thought to actually watch. I spent the next several days in something like a fog, going through the motions of an ordinary life while a small tablet hidden in my nightstand drawer quietly recorded everything that happened in my own house. I want to tell you that this was not thrilling. It was not, whatever you might be picturing, some exciting spy movie sequence. It was the loneliest week of my life. I sat across the dinner table from my grandson every night, passing him the salt, asking about his day at the logistics company, listening to him talk about his client accounts, and the entire time some cold, watchful part of me, the insurance investigator part, the part I had spent my whole retirement trying to let rest, was cataloging every gesture, every word, every small kindness he showed his mother, searching for the lie underneath it. On the fourth night, I got the lab results back on my personal email, the one Caleb had never had reason to access, and I sat alone in my study with the door locked, and I read them twice, and then a third time, because I could not make my mind accept what my eyes were telling me. The blood work showed elevated levels of a common over-the-counter sedative, one found in dozens of allergy and sleep medications, at a concentration far beyond what any reasonable dosage would produce, alongside trace markers consistent with an anticholinergic compound, the kind of substance. The accompanying note from the independent physician I'd consulted explained gently that in a healthy person might just cause drowsiness and confusion, but that in someone already suffering cognitive decline could accelerate memory loss, disorientation, and the appearance of advancing dementia symptoms dramatically, symptoms that would look, to almost any doctor without cause for deeper suspicion, exactly like the natural progression of Alzheimer's disease. My daughter was not simply sick. My daughter was being made sicker, deliberately, by someone in her own house who dispensed her medication every single night with his own 2 hands. I did not confront him. Not yet. I want you to understand why. Because I know some of you liberal want to reach through this screen and shake me for waiting even one more hour. I did not confront him because in 31 years of investigation, I learned one lesson harder than any other. A man caught with only suspicion in his hand will lie his way out of a room, but a man caught with proof laid out in front of him has nowhere left to go. I needed proof. I needed to see it happen. I needed the cameras to catch the moment, not my own exhausted, grief-shattered word against his. So I waited. I sat with my daughter in the evenings and I held her hand, and I looked into her clouded, gentle eyes, and I thought about the sharp young paralegal who used to help me with my own case files. And I promised her, silently, that I was going to bring her back, whatever it cost me. On the 7th night, at 7:04 in the evening, the kitchen camera caught it. I watched the footage the next morning, alone, my coffee going cold beside me, my hands not quite steady on the tablet. Caleb, standing at the counter, opening 2 separate pill bottles, Roz's actual prescribed medications on his left, and on his right, a small unmarked bottle he pulled from inside a kitchen drawer lined with dish towels. The same drawer I must have opened 1,000 times myself looking for a spatula, never once thinking to look beneath the towels. I watched him crush 2 tablets from the unmarked bottle with the back of a spoon, watched him fold the powder into a small cup of apple juice, watched him carry it to his mother with the same easy, tender smile he'd worn walking back into that neurologist's office 3 days earlier, watched him kneel beside her chair and say, gently, "Here you go, Mom. Drink up. This'll help you sleep." And watched my daughter, my Rosalind, drink it down without hesitation, because she trusted him, because he was her son, because in the wreckage of her mind, he was one of the only 2 faces she reliably still knew. I sat in my study and I put my head in my hands and I wept for the first time since Eleanor's funeral 11 years ago. But grief was a luxury I could not afford yet. There was still the question I had turned over every night since that appointment. Why? Not the how. I had the how now, recorded in high definition, time-stamped, undeniable. I needed the why, because a man like me, a man who spent his whole career reading people, could not simply believe that a boy I had watched grow up kind was, underneath it all, simply cruel. There had to be a reason, and I suspected, the way I always suspected in 31 years of watching people lie about money, that the reason would be money. I called an old colleague from my investigator days, a forensic accountant named Bev Okafor who owed me a favor from a fraud case we'd cracked together 15 years earlier, and I asked her, quietly, off the books, to look into the accounts Caleb had been managing since he'd taken power of attorney. It took her 4 days. What she found broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully mend. Caleb had been systematically draining his mother's modest trust, the money Eleanor had left, specifically for Roz's future care, roughly $210,000, meant to fund a good memory care facility someday, when the disease progressed past what home care could manage, into a series of increasingly reckless investments in a cryptocurrency trading scheme that had, over the past 18 months, lost nearly all of it. Bev found the emails, the transaction records, all buried under folder names designed to look boring, unremarkable, the kind of thing you'd scroll past without a second look. There was, at the time she pulled the records, less than $11,000 left of what should have been $210,000. And there, finally, was my why. If Roz's decline was natural, If it simply progressed the way these diseases progress, then eventually, perhaps within a year or two, according to the trajectory doctor, Halverson himself had once mentioned she would need full-time memory care, a facility, professional oversight, the kind of arrangement that comes with financial audits, with outside doctors, with paperwork that would eventually, inevitably, reveal that the money meant to pay for it was gone. But if her decline accelerated, if it happened fast enough, violently enough, perhaps Caleb believed there would be some window, some gap, between her incapacitation and anyone thinking to check the accounts closely in which he could either recover the losses or simply disappear before anyone noticed. Or perhaps, and this is the possibility that still keeps me up at night, perhaps he had simply stopped thinking that far ahead at all, and was only ever trying to buy himself one more week, one more month, before the truth caught up with him, the way desperate people so often do, not planning a crime so much as drowning in one small poisoned spoonful at a time. I did not go to the police first. I know that surprises some of you, and I understand if you think less of me for it, but I want to explain my reasoning, because 31 years in insurance investigation taught me one more hard truth. Cases built too fast, on evidence gathered in a panic, get torn apart by defense attorneys who do this for a living. I needed everything airtight. I needed medical corroboration, not just my private lab result but an official diagnosis from a doctor with no connection to Caleb whatsoever. I needed Bev's financial paper trail notarized and organized. I needed the camera footage properly dated, properly preserved, backed up in 3 separate places. I spent 9 more days doing quietly, meticulously, what I had spent 31 years learning how to do, building a case so complete that no lawyer on earth could talk his way out of it. And I went back to Dr. Menon, alone this time, without Caleb, and I told her everything. I watched relief and horror move across her face in equal measure. She told me she'd suspected something was deeply wrong the moment she'd seen those blood work markers that no textbook progression of Alzheimer's could explain, but that she'd had no proof, only a professional instinct sharpened over 14 years of practice, and a referral note from a retired doctor that had somehow gotten lost in a file transfer 8 months earlier lost. I would later come to believe, not by accident but because Caleb, who had personally requested and hand-delivered Roz's medical records during the transition to Dr. Menon's office, had quietly removed the page. Dr. Menon agreed to file an official report with the state's Adult Protective Services Division that same afternoon, her professional observations now backed by independent blood work that could not be dismissed as coincidence. 9 days after that pharmacy bag walked back through Dr. Menon's office door, 2 officers from the county sheriff's department and a caseworker from Adult Protective Services came to my house on a Tuesday morning while Caleb was at work. I had made sure of the timing. I did not want my grandson arrested in front of his mother, whatever he had done to her some cruelties. I decided I was not willing to add to, even in the name of justice. I sat with Roz in the sitting room, holding her hand, while the caseworker gently explained to her, in the simplest words possible, that some changes were going to be made to keep her safe, and Roz looked at me with those clouded, drifting eyes and said, quite clearly, in a moment of lucidity that undid me completely, "Is my boy in trouble, Daddy?" I did not have an answer for her that felt true and kind at the same time. I only held her hand tighter. Caleb was arrested that evening, at his office, in front of his coworkers, on charges that would eventually include elder abuse, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and financial fraud. When the detective called to confirm the arrest, I asked, because I needed to know, whether Caleb had said anything. The detective told me only that my grandson had gone very pale and very quiet, and had asked one question before he stopped speaking entirely and asked for a lawyer. He had asked whether his mother was going to be okay. I have turned that question over in my mind every day since, brother, sister. Whoever is out there listening tonight in your kitchen or your car or your bed with the lights off, I do not know what to make of a young man who could do what he did and still, at the very end, still ask that question and seem to mean it. Perhaps that is the truest, saddest thing I can tell you about all of this, that cruelty and love are not always opposites in the human heart. Sometimes they live in the very same room, the way a poison and a cure can be made from the same plant, depending only on the dose and the hand that measures it out. Roz has been off every trace of that sedative for 6 weeks now, under the close supervision of Dr. Menon and a new specialist team, and I need to tell you, because I promised myself I would only tell this story if I could tell you the truth of what happened after. not just the horror of what happened during. My daughter is not fully back. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think honesty is the only gift an old man really has left to give. 7 years of a disease that may have been partly natural and partly manufactured does not simply reverse itself because the poisoning stopped. But she is sharper than she has been in 3 years. She knows my name every single morning now, not just some mornings. 2 weeks ago, she asked me, unprompted, whether I remembered the blue dress Eleanor wore to Caleb's high school graduation, and I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried like a child because she had not offered me an unprompted memory in over 3 years. We sold the house last month. I could not live in those rooms anymore, could not walk past that kitchen counter without seeing footage I will never fully unsee. Roz and I found a small place together near the coast, 2 hours from everything that happened, with a porch that catches the evening light and a kitchen where I do the cooking now. Every meal, with my own 2 hands, because I find that I like knowing exactly what goes into everything she eats. Some nights we sit out on that porch and she hums that same tune she used to hum in the car, the one I never recognized, and I've stopped trying to place it. I've decided it doesn't need a name. It just needs somebody to sit beside her and listen. Caleb's case is still moving through the courts. I am told, by the prosecutor handling it, that given the medical evidence and the financial records Bev helped uncover, a plea agreement is likely, one that will keep him from ever again holding legal authority over a vulnerable person and will very probably mean real time behind bars. I have not spoken to him since the morning those officers walked into my house. I do not know, some days, if I ever will. I am an old man, and I have spent 31 years believing that the truth, once uncovered, was the end of a story. I am learning, slowly, painfully, at 68 years old, that sometimes the truth is only where a much longer, much harder story actually begins. If you are listening tonight, and something in your gut has been telling you that a person you love isn't quite getting better the way they should be, that the story doesn't quite add up the way everyone around you insists it does, I am asking you, as one parent, one grandparent, one tired old man to another, please, do not talk yourself out of paying attention. I spent 31 years learning to notice what other people missed, and it very nearly cost me my own daughter that I almost didn't think to look closely enough at my own family. Don't make my mistake. Look closely. Trust the doctor who whispers instead of speaks. And hold on, with both hands, to the people this world has given you to protect, because I promise you, from the bottom of whatever is left of my heart, they are worth every sleepless night it takes to keep them safe.